As someone who's read every chapter of the original Solo Leveling manhwa, I am supremely excited to finally get the chance to sit down and talk about my impressions of the first 2 episodes of the new Solo Leveling anime. If you're a longtime fan of my YouTube channel, you are already well aware of my love of the series Solo Leveling. This is probably not only my favorite manhwa of all time, but Jin-Woo is probably one of my favorite protagonists in any manhwa or any manga that I've ever read. And I also feel like Solo Leveling does a really good job with its battles. I think nothing is quite like Solo Leveling when you're in the middle of a super hype fight and things are flying all over the place and you've got that beautiful art and Jin-Woo is just oozing cool. However, many of you might remember that the first time that I did a read-through for Solo Leveling, I was not a huge fan of the first story arc. And more of you might remember that when I initially did my reaction to the first trailer for the Solo Leveling anime, I was left a little bit underwhelmed. I thought the art really wasn't all that good. It wasn't standing out to me. I don't know, I didn't really enjoy what little music that we heard, and overall, I just was not really going into this with super high expectations. Again, the original Solo Leveling manhwa means so much to me, and I think the art is just so beautiful and the characters are so great, but neither the anime or the manga really left a great first impression. With that being said, I feel like by the end of the second episode of Solo Leveling, which many of you are going to be watching for the first time later this week, I feel like they actually nail the opening arc of the series. And I actually think the anime's version of the first 2 episodes worth of content is better than the manhwa's version in a number of different ways. First and foremost, I'm getting into the nitty-gritty a little bit here, so please excuse me if you're an anime-only watcher. I'm going to try my best to not spoil the manhwa. First things first, I think it was really smart to introduce the S-rank hunters early on. Characters like Choi, characters like Cha, characters that you would not normally see until you get to the Ant arc a little bit later on. I think it was so good to show what those hunters are capable of, to give the mainstream viewers who know nothing about Solo Leveling a really good gauge on what the S-rank hunters can really do. There's a sequence, I think it was in episode 2, it might have been in episode 1. My memory's kind of fuzzy because it's been a couple weeks since I watched these episodes for the first time. But there's a scene in which you see Cha-Ha-En for the first time in the middle of a street in Korea doing flips, and you're like, what the heck is up with this character? I can't wait to see more of her. And yet you don't see her in the manhwa until way later. I say way later, but it's a couple volumes in. You don't see her in the beginning. And she's obviously a major supporting character and somebody that I think really could benefit from being shown earlier on. Another character, much like Cha, is Choi. I think when you see Choi in that initial confrontation in the first episode, you know, commanding some of the hunters against some of these other monsters, it really sort of gives you a good barometer of what to expect from the strongest characters in the verse, or who you believe to be the strongest characters in the verse by this point of the story. And while we're still on the topic of introducing the S-rank hunters a little bit earlier on, one thing that was actually pointed out to me at the premiere is that that initial scene in which you are introduced to Cha-Ha-En on the street is actually in the light novel version of Solo Leveling. Now again, I've read every chapter of the manhwa, but I am not nearly as familiar with the light novel. I know a couple plot points here and there, but I've never actually read the light novel. I have no interest in reading the light novel, especially when it comes to a series like Solo Leveling that has such beautiful art. I would just much rather read the manhwa. But I think that's really cool that they're introducing stuff from the light novel in the anime version. So those of us that have actually read the manhwa are getting to experience new things for the first time. And something else I want to specifically shout out that immediately stood out to me during these first 2 episodes is just how good the music is in the Solo Leveling anime. I should not be surprised considering the fact that Sawano is doing the music, who obviously is known for such greats as Attack on Titan, but man, oh man, does the music hit. And that was one of my big concerns. If you go back and watch my reaction to that initial trailer, I felt like the music wasn't really standing out to me in the way I was expecting it to. If you are familiar with my content at all and you remember any of my read-through streams streams for Solo Leveling, you know that music played such a big role in my initial read of this series. You know, we would get into some really major fights with Jinwoo and these other characters, and we'd be blaring the Smash Brothers soundtrack in the background with all these bombastic orchestral bits, and I feel like by the end of the second episode, the music really was one of the big standouts in the anime. I think they did a great job of matching the right tone of that scene in the double dungeon right at the very beginning with some really amazing music tracks, and I am so excited to hear what the rest of the soundtrack is going to be like once we get a little further into the story. I am also a big fan of the opening of the anime. I think that's something else that I was semi-concerned about. I feel like when you've got a hype show like Solo Leveling, you need a good anime opening to back up that hype, and I feel like the opening, based on what I heard during that premiere, does such a good job of doing that. I'm still humming, you're giving yourself the best shot. Like, I think that's a good sign. When you have a good hook for the chorus, you're in for a good time. And while I'm still discussing the positive aspects of this anime adaptation of Solo Leveling, I specifically want to give a shout out to the voice actor for Jinwoo. He does such a good job. They could not have cast anyone better as Jinwoo. I think he does a really good job in the first episode, but man, oh man, when you guys get to that second episode of the show is when his acting really shines. Again, those of you who are manhwa readers know what's about to go down, but once you experience the height of Jinwoo's desperation and you hear him just gutturally screaming and making all these noises, it really does feel like all hope seems lost, which is exactly what you need from that moment. But if there's one thing that I still am not entirely sold on in the anime adaptation of Solo Leveling yet, it's unfortunately the animation itself. Now, that is not to say that I think the animation in this adaptation is bad. In fact, I think it's pretty good, specifically the fluidity of movement when you've got moments like Cha doing backflips in the air, or you've got the giant statues crashing down in the hunters in the double dungeon, or you have that really awesome opening moment with the hunters fighting the ants. All of that stuff looks really good. But one thing that I loved in the original manhwa of Solo Leveling was the detail of every single panel. Every panel in that manhwa you could clip out and put on your wall as a piece of art to display. It just is absolutely gorgeous. The particle effects that they use in the manhwa, the colorization of the manhwa. I still can't entirely put my finger on why it looks cheap to me. And that's not to say, again, there's not a budget behind the show. That's not to say that I think the animation quality is bad. It's just that the detail of the manhwa really didn't translate, in my opinion, very well to the anime. Now, again, we are very early on. This could absolutely change by the 4th, 5th, or 6th episode. And I do think there are moments of greatness in terms of the animation in these first couple episodes. In particular, the iconic grin of the statue in the double dungeon is peak. That is exactly how it should have looked in the anime. But then again, there are moments in which characters' limbs are flying off, or when characters are getting hurt, and it just doesn't come across the same way. The blood, and I can't even really describe it right, but it's like the blood spurts that come out of the characters don't look natural. They don't look as artistic as the manhwa looked, and that's a bit of a bummer to me. Now, again, that's an area they can absolutely improve on later on, and maybe that's something that we're going to see more of as Jinwoo's powers evolve. But for the time being, if I could say one negative about the series and one thing that I'm still not entirely sold on, it's unfortunately the animation. But despite my gripes with the animation not being as detailed as I wish it was, I do think that overall this is a very strong start for the Solo Leveling anime. I think this will absolutely get new people into the series, and I do feel like, again, these first 2 episodes do a much better job of introducing the world of Solo Leveling to the viewer than even the original manhwa did. And I know the big question that a lot of people are going to have for me is, okay, well, that's all well and good, but Roger, are you going to be doing reactions to every episode of Solo Leveling? And the answer is maybe. I don't know right now. I do have a positive impression of the series overall based on these first 2 episodes, but the same level of hype that I had for the manhwa isn't there quite yet. I do think it will eventually get there. I do think there's ample opportunity to get to the point where I'm hyped for every single episode, but right now, I'm probably going to watch the episodes whenever I get the chance to watch them. I'm not like hankering to watch every single one, and I'm not going to be F5ing on Crunchyroll to watch it. But again, once we get to the first big emergency quest, once we get to Arise, rest assured I will be watching that and probably uploading my reactions. And if you want to see those live reactions, make sure you're following me on twitch.tv/RogersBase. That's where we'll be reacting to every episode that I choose to react to. And if there's a particularly good one, rest assured that reaction will probably be uploaded right here to the YouTube channel. With all that being said, thanks so much for watching today, and I am just happy that mainstream viewers are finally going to experience the greatness that is Solo!